Ok. Alors, nous allons poursuivre les travaux avec l'examen du point 14.4 qui porte sur la sélection de nouvelles combinaisons espèces-pays à étudier à la suite de la COP20. Je donne la parole au secrétariat pour nous présenter le document.
Thank you, Chair. Document 14.4 presents the trade analysis produced in accordance with the provisions of Resolution Conf 12.8, Rev COP 18, and based on the guidance contained in Annex 2 to the resolution. The extended analysis in Annex 1 to the document could provide the working basis to support the committee's discussions and recommendations relating to the preliminary selection of species country combinations. The data used to prepare the summary are available in Excel format in Information Document PC28-INF1. In paragraphs 5 to 8, the Secretariat highlights some updates to the methodology, contextual information, and symbols used in the analysis. In paragraph 10, the Secretariat highlights that given current resource limitations, the Secretariat can support reviews for only 24 species country combinations across both the Animals and Plants committees. The committee is therefore invited to select 12 species country combinations together with a reserve list of 5 additional combinations that could be considered if funding becomes available. These reserve cases should be ranked in order of importance. It should be noted that the Animals Committee identified 12 species country combinations and a reserve list of 7 species country combinations, and they're waiting with bated breath whether we're going to fill our quota. As many participants may be new to CITES and to the RST process, the Secretariat has prepared an information document, PC28-INF14, which sets out the RST process and the different stages involved, explains the methodology used in the trade analysis, outlines what happens before PC28, what will happen during and after PC28, and provides advice on how range states that are selected for inclusion in stage 2 of the review should respond to the consultation by the Secretariat. An adapted version of the timeline for RST from Annex 1 of the resolution is presented in the annex to this INFDoc. To provide a bit more detail on how the process will be applied between COP20 and COP21. Finally, following PC28 and shortly after consultation letters have been sent, the Secretariat will hold webinars to provide guidance to those range states that are selected for inclusion in stage 2 of the RST at this meeting on how to respond to the Secretariat. Details of this webinar will be included in the consultation letters to the affected countries. The Secretariat hopes that this will be of assistance to the concerned range states. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, secrétariat. Je souhaite avoir quelques brèves interventions et je précise que je propose de constituer un groupe de travail en session sur le processus d'étude du commerce important. Donc, veuillez s'il vous plaît limiter vos observations à des commentaires de nature générale afin d'aborder les différentes combinaisons espèces-pays durant les discussions du groupe de travail. Aussi, je donne la parole aux membres du comité. La région Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes, vous avez la parole.
Gracias, señora presidenta. A solicitud de la República de Paraguay, quisiera informar que ese país ha presentado al Comité de Flora para que sea considerado un documento informativo en relación a discrepancias que han encontrado con el informe presentado en el anexo 1 del documento 14.4 respecto del aumento pronunciado de volúmenes de exportaciones informadas por la base de datos de CITES y los registros de exportaciones nacionales para ese país para la especie Bullnesia sarmientoi para los años 2023 y 2024. El documento al que traigo atención está publicado como documento informativo 10 en inglés y en español y Paraguay le gustaría que sea considerado por el comité. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Merci à la représentante de la région Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes. Y a-t-il d'autres membres du comité qui souhaitent prendre la parole? Non. Aussi, je donne la parole aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Singapour, vous avez la parole.
Madam Chair, Singapore thanks UNEP WCMC for preparing the analysis to support the selection of species-country combination for inclusion in the RSC. As a general observation, Singapore wishes to raise an issue regarding the inclusion of Singapore for Equilaria melicensis under the sharp increased country criterion for 2023. So this is not a new issue. Singapore raised the same concern at PC 26 and it was reflected in PC Com Doc 6, where the RSC working group recommended that the Secretariat liaise with UNEP WCMC to explore ways to address such discrepancy at an earlier stage of the analysis. Despite this recommendation, the same discrepancy has occurred, resulting in Singapore again being incorrectly identified under the Stage 1 criteria and raising questions about the accuracy and efficiency of the current RSC screening process. To reiterate, while Singapore is a range state for Equilaria melicensis, the species is protected within our nature reserve and is not harvested or directly exported from Singapore. Resolution Conference 12.2 specifies that the recorded level of direct export should be used for Stage 1 of RSC. In Singapore's case, all quantity of these species passing through Singapore are re-exports and are not direct exports from Singapore as a range state. The discrepancy arises because the analysis takes the higher quantity between exporter and importer reported data. In this case, the higher quantity appears to be importer reported as imports from Singapore, even though Singapore corresponding record relate to re-exports and not direct exports. Singapore therefore urges the Secretariat and UNEP WCMC to address this long-standing issue as a priority and to refine the methodology so that future analysis accurately distinguish between direct exports and re-exports. Otherwise, the committee may continue to be directed to parties that do not meet the prescribed criteria, diverting attention and resources from cases that may warrant genuine scrutiny. Singapore therefore requests the Plans Committee to take this discrepancy fully into account when considering Singapore's inclusion in the RSC, as the Stage 1 criterion is based on recorded direct exports and Singapore has no recorded direct exports of Equilaria melicensis. Singapore should not be included in the RSC process for this species on the basis of the current analysis. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci. Je donne la parole au représentant du Cameroun.
Une fois de plus, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole donnée, le Cameroun prend bonne note des nouvelles combinaisons espèces-pays. Il souhaite néanmoins formuler une observation de fond, vraiment sur la nature du mécanisme. L'examen du commerce est important, a pour objectif, si je m'en tiens au texte, d'identifier les espèces de l'annexe 2 pour lesquelles la mise en œuvre de l'article 4 soulève une préoccupation avérée, mais également d'y apporter des mesures correctives. La sélection d'une combinaison suppose donc qu'une analyse des données de commerce mette en évidence une préoccupation réelle et actuelle. Par contre, sur les espèces récemment sorties du processus, le Cameroun s'étonne de voir réidentifier des espèces qui viennent d'achever ce processus, notamment le Prunus africana, dont l'examen a été clôturé en 2024, et la Samela. pour lesquels le Cameroun a mis en œuvre des recommandations formulées. Or, la logique même de la résolution commande qu'une combinaison ayant satisfait aux recommandations antérieures ne soit pas réintroduite en l'absence d'éléments nouveaux et matériels attestant d'une préoccupation nouvelle au regard de l'article 4. Le Cameroun demande donc quelles données nouvelles justifieraient une telle réinscription. Sur les espèces récemment inscrites, s'agissant de la Vselia et du Pterocarpus, ainsi en annexe 2 seulement à la COP 2022, la série de données commerciales postérieures à l'inscription demeure courte, tandis que le Cameroun déploie précisément les efforts requis pour asseoir les avis de commerce non préjudiciables, l'équité et la traçabilité. Conclure le non-respect de l'article 4 sur la base des données encore, selon nous, immatures, reviendrait à pénaliser une partie de sa bonne foi. Le Cameroun plaide pour qu'un délai raisonnable de mise en œuvre soit reconnu après une inscription récente, avant toute sélection. Pour la cohérence entre le processus d'appui en cours, le Cameroun est déjà engagé avec le secrétariat dans les missions techniques, le programme CITES pour les essences d'arbres et des actions de renforcement des capacités. Superposer une sélection du haut tigre à ces efforts risque de créer un double emploi. Les deux démarches devraient être articulées en conséquence. Le Cameroun demande respectivement en un que les analyses et critères ayant fondé la sélection des combinaisons le concernant soient partagés et examinés avec lui avant toute décision. Que les examens récemment clôturés, Prunus africana et le cas ancien où les progrès sont démontrés par Pericopsis et Latala-Samla ne soient pas réinscrits en l'absence d'éléments nouveaux. Que pour les espèces récemment inscrites, Vselia Pterocarpus, un délai raisonnable de mise en œuvre soit reconnu et enfin que toute sélection soit coordonnée avec l'appui déjà apporté au Cameroun. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie le représentant du Cameroun. Je donne la parole aux Pays-Bas.
Yes, I'm on air again. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, we'd like to thank WCMC for all the great work done. We could not have this discussion today without their work. Secondly, we'd like to align with the comment made by Singapore to emphasize the importance of distinguishing export and re-export. The third and final point, I'll keep it short, Madam Chair, is that in the Annex 2, the long list, for many species, the source code is not specified. And, well, as the Netherlands is a major importer and exporter of plant material, we scrutinize the list. And drawing conclusions is difficult when source codes are not provided. So we suggest to take that observation of the lacking of source code information to take on board in a further discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je donne la parole à l'Indonésie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia would like to echo Singapore and emphasizing regarding the data discrepancy between exporter and importing report. Indonesia would like to also highlight the importance of ensuring methodological consistency when assessing the contribution of individual countries to global trade volumes. In cases where trade data are reported in different units, such as cubic meters or kilograms, appropriate conversion factors should be applied before calculating percentage or making comparisons. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Indonésie. Je donne la parole aux Émirats arabes unis.
Thank you, Chair. The United Arab Emirates thanks the Secretariat and UNIP WCMC for the comprehensive extended analysis in Annex 1 and for the transparency of the methodology set out there. We align ourselves with Singapore's statement and offer one methodological observation. A number of combinations in Table 4 are flagged under the sharp increase criterion, alone at a genus level. As the analysis records, range status is not determined for taxa reported at genus level or higher. Where a flagged party is not a range state for the taxon concerned, there is no national non-determinant finding under Article 4 to be examined, and it is precisely the implementation of Article 4, paragraphs 2, small a, 3 and 6, small a, that stage 2 exists to review. We would add that sharp increase criterion is a ratio test against a 5 years mean. For parties with low trade volumes, small absolute increases may trigger the criterion without reflecting increased harvest pressure. Such signals are, in our view, more consistent with trading, re-export, or reporting patterns than with a range state conservation concern. Consistent with paragraph 7, which recognizes the contextual information alone may be justify stage 2, and mindful of the resource constraints noted in paragraph 10, we encourage the committee to focus its review on range state species level combinations, where Article 4 implementation can be meaningfully assessed, while treating genus level signals involving non-range states as matters for clarification with Secretariat rather than selection for review. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante des Émirats arabes unis. Je donne la parole à la Chine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China also shares the same concern raised by Singapore regarding the data discrepancy. We have observed inconsistency between the import and export data reported by respective parties. To ensure accuracy and concurrency in the dataset, we recommend that the concerned parties engaged in bilateral consultations outside the meeting to resolve these discrepancies. Furthermore, to prevent similar issues in the future, we recommend importing parties to consult with their corresponding exporting parties before making any changes to the source codes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la Chine. Je donne la parole à la Malaisie.
Thank you, Chair. Malaysia would like to align ourselves with the intervention from Singapore, Indonesia, and China on data discrepancies. Thank you.
Merci aux représentants de la Malaisie. République de Corée, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank the Secretary and UNFWCMC for the preparation of this document. The Republic of Korea would like to align itself with the statement made by Singapore. We consider the methodological concerns raised to be important for improving the effectiveness of the RST selection process, and we support the further consideration of this issue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la Malaisie, de la République de Corée. Qatar, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Qatar would like to ensure that consider raised by Singapore regarding difference in the trade data and the methodology used for selecting new species countries combination under the RST process. We believe that checking those different with the parties concerned will make the process more accurate and transparent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie la représentante du Qatar. J'ouvre maintenant la liste de demandes de parole au... pardon, les États-Unis, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fully appreciate the conversation on the floor here about the selection process, and I think it is really important for the general knowledge of how review of significant trade works that the analysis that's conducted by UNEP WCMC is done at the request of the parties in the resolution, and it's not a pre-selection process. So the discussions that are going to presumably happen, well, that will happen at this meeting, will include the context that's being provided here on the floor. We agree that there do seem to be some trade discrepancies that continue to come back up. But generally speaking, the selection criteria are not perfect. We're passing them around for plants. I don't know, is it 35,000 taxa? So we're using this sort of broad brushstroke in order to kind of come up with some ideas. While the short list in Annex 2 might be the source of this taxa that are selected, it doesn't have to be from that list. It could be using the raw data from the other annex or any other species for reasons that might be supported in discussion. So I think that's why it's also really important for parties to participate in the working group discussions, because it helps clarify, the information that we're seeing that is, of course, generically provided for further discussion and consideration. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante des États-Unis. Je vois plus de demandes de parole de la part des partis en statut d'observateur. Aussi, j'ouvre la liste des observateurs pour prendre la parole. UNEP WCMC, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to Singapore's intervention on the methodology for the RST process as supported by a number of parties, we would just like to recall that Resolution 12.8 Rev COP 18 specifies the data to be used in the extended analysis should use the gross export or the higher of the two quantities as reported by either the exporter or the importer as a precautionary measure. This means that trade data used in the analysis is not necessarily what was reported by the exporting party. We fully support China's intervention on the need for parties to engage in bilateral consultations to improve the trade data and correct any discrepancies that have been identified. If the committee support changes to the methodology of the process, the Animals and Plants committees could further evaluate specific aspects of the RST methodologies at their meeting in 2027, following Ireland's suggestion within the Animals Committee working group of the RST. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à UNEP WCMC. Y a-t-il d'autres demandes de prise de parole de la part des observateurs? UICN, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. IUCN would like to draw attention to trade data in Table 4 on page 27, showing high volumes of live Orchidaceae spur exports from Thailand, recorded without a source code, meeting 3 RST selection criteria: high volume, sharp increase in global trade, sharp increase from Thailand. IUCN recognizes Thailand's long-standing and globally significant role as a producer and exporter of artificially propagated orchids, supported by a well-established horticultural industry, and welcomes the important contribution this legal trade makes to both livelihoods and to reducing pressure on wild populations. 3/4 of CITES listed species are orchids, and Southeast Asia is a major hotspot for both Appendix 1 and 2 species diversity, many highly endemic and threatened by trade and habitat loss. Noting the RST selection operates at the species level, IUCN recognizes that it is not possible to review higher order taxa listings in the RST process. We therefore would like to suggest this issue be considered at the Standing Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à l'UICN. Je vous reviens pour la conclusion. Alors, concernant le point 14.4, voici la conclusion. Le comité pour les plantes prend note des préoccupations exprimées concernant les écarts de données et la méthodologie utilisée dans l'analyse qui sous-tend la sélection des espèces dans le cadre de l'étude du commerce important et invite le secrétariat à examiner ces préoccupations en collaboration avec le PNUE WCMC. Puis, le comité pour les plantes établit un groupe de travail en session avec le mandat suivant. Conformément au paragraphe 1b de la résolution COF 12.8 REV COP 18, petit a, examiner les informations figurant dans les annexes au document PC28 DOC 14.4 ainsi que toute information supplémentaire disponible. Et petit b, sélectionner une liste prioritaire de 12 combinaisons espèces-pays suscitant les plus vives préoccupations en vue de leur inclusion dans l'étape 2 de l'étude du commerce important, ainsi qu'une liste de 5 combinaisons espèces-pays supplémentaires pouvant être incluses sous réserve de la disponibilité des financements en précisant les motifs ayant conduit à leur sélection. Voici le groupe de travail est établi. J'ai fait lecture du mandat. Ce groupe de travail sera présidé par le représentant de l'Océanie, Damien Riley. Et maintenant, je passe à la composition du groupe de travail en invitant les membres du comité à y participer. Alors, quels sont les membres du comité qui prendront part? Alors, nous avons la région Asie, l'Europe, l'Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes, Afrique. Maintenant, je passe aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Malaisie, Suisse, Pays-Bas, Mexique, République démocratique populaire Laos, les Émirats arabes unis, Mexique, vous pouvez, merci, Irlande, Gabon, Fédération de Russie, États-Unis, France, Chine, Belgique, Portugal, Cameroun, Singapour, Zambie, Australie, Afrique du Sud, Indonésie, Royaume-Uni, Namibie, Canada, République de Corée, Thaïlande, Brésil, Tanzanie, Allemagne, Espagne, Lituanie, Kenya, Ghana, Arabie Saoudite, Zimbabwe, Costa Rica, Qatar, Union européenne, Oman. Thaïlande, Costa Rica, Oman, pouvez-vous enlever, appuyer sur le... Voilà. Costa Rica, s'il vous plaît. Annulez votre demande de Costa Rica.
Maybe Congo, because some
Congo.
they're sitting at the Costa Rica
Ah. C'est Congo ou... Parce que moi, ça s'affiche Costa Rica. Attends. Ah. Tchéquie. République tchèque. Ok, bah, c'est... Maintenant, la composition du groupe de travail avec les observateurs. Ah, Finlande comme partie. Maintenant, les observateurs. UICN, SSN, WWF, International Fragrance Association, UNEP, SA Taxi, voilà, Am Herbal Prod, American Herbal Products Association, Taylor Guitars, Suco SA, Forest Based, ITTO, IWPA. Le groupe est ainsi établi. Je vous remercie. Le point 14 à l'ordre du jour est clos. Nous passons maintenant au point 17, identification des bois et autres produits. Ce document a été préparé par le secrétariat. Je vous donne la parole pour présenter le document.
Thank you, Chair. This document reports on the implementation of Decision 20.125 on identification of timber and other wood products and provides the basis for the committee's work under Decision 19.147, Rev. COP20. Following a notification to the parties, the Secretariat received responses from 11 parties and 1 NGO. These are collated in Annex 1 to the document, which presents a draft priority list of taxa for ID materials, a summary of identification techniques and tools, information on existing wood sample collections and standards, a draft wood sample collection form, and candidate databases for inclusion in the CITES Timber Repository. Additionally, Annex 2 to the document presents the final assessment of timber identification techniques and tools resulting from the Secretariat's partnerships with CRIWI-GAF, building on the outcomes of the last meeting of the Plans Committee. The report confirms that no single technique can meet all identification needs and recommends strengthening reference specimen resources, promoting the integrated use of complementary techniques, and developing standardized information templates. On this basis, the Secretariat recommends the committee to establish an in-session working group to take forward the tasks under Decision 19.147, Rev. COP20, as set out in paragraph 15, with a minor revision as follows. The Secretariat would like to propose one revision to paragraph 15B of the draft mandate, where the reference to Section 5 of Annex 1 should be removed so that the mechanisms to address the shortage of vouchered reference samples are based solely on Annex 2. We would like to stress that Section 5 of Annex 1 is already fully addressed under Recommendation 15E of the draft mandate. So this revision avoids redundancy and ensures that Annex 2 is considered where it is most appropriate, which is, in our view, under 15B. So to repeat, the new 15B paragraph would read, to advise on possible mechanisms to address the shortage of vouchered reference samples for priority CITES listed tree species. And here would be the change, where that paragraph would close saying, using as a basis Annex 2 to the present document. And that would be the only change. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, secrétariat. Donc, je me tourne vers les membres du comité pour savoir si vous êtes d'accord avec les amendements proposés par le secrétariat dans le cadre de ce mandat. Donc, c'est le paragraphe 15B du document. Qui ne dit mot consent. Donc, le mandat est celui proposé dans le paragraphe 15 avec l'amendement mineur. Maintenant, je souhaiterais recueillir des commentaires généraux, sachant qu'il y aura un groupe de travail pour cela. Membres du comité. Parti ayant statut d'observateur. États-Unis, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports the recommendations in document PC 28, document 17 to establish an in-session working group, recognizing that additional intersessional work will be needed to address the mandate and develop requested outputs. We also note that the document includes information on the ongoing and proposed activities under this agenda item. We consider it important that considerations of these activities be reflected in the working group's mandate and seek support for a working group to review these efforts and provide input for future priorities and next steps as it develops its recommendations. Thank you.
Merci, États-Unis. Brésil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil fully supports the development of identification materials, reference databases, and tools for CITES-listed tree species. In this context, we believe that Pau-Brasilia equinata should be considered among the highest priority species for this work. Annex 1, Table 1 of PC 28, Doc 17, identifies Pau-Brasilia equinata as a species for which the available information materials remain only partial and which is at high risk of misidentification with Coulteria platyloba, formerly Caesalpinia platyloba. Brazil's own enforcement experience confirmed that it's not merely a theoretical concern. We have recently identified BAUs offered for sale on the European market as Coulteria platyloba, marketed under the commercial name Mexican Pernambuco. Subsequent examination indicated that the wood was, in fact, Pau-Brasilia equinata. This example illustrates precisely the implementation challenge highlighted in the document. The difficulty in reliably distinguishing these species creates opportunities for misidentification and may undermine the effective implementation of the Convention. Effective traceability should not rely solely on documentation, digital records, or making systems. Whenever questions arise, enforcement authorities must also have access to reliable scientific and practical tools capable of verifying the identity of the wood itself. For these reasons, Brazil strongly supports maintaining Pau-Brasilia equinata in the highest priority species list and looks forward to participating in the in-session working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie la représentante du Brésil. Je donne maintenant la parole à la Malaisie.
Thank you, Chair. Malaysia welcomes the Secretariat for the document and supports the establishment of the working group. In addition, referring to Annex 2 of this agenda document under Section 3, wood identification technologies and tools relevant for CITES listed 3 species in page 24, Malaysia would like to suggest a correction and inform that My Wood ID smartphone-based wood identification device was developed by Forest Research Institute of Malaysia and University Tunku Abdul Rahman. Thank you, Chair.
Merci. J'ouvre la liste des demandes de parole des observateurs. Pas de demande de parole. Je vous reviens. Alors, le comité pour les plantes établit le groupe de travail en session avec le mandat tel qu'il est établi dans le paragraphe 15 du document PC 28 Doc 17 tel qu'amendé par le secrétariat. Ce groupe de travail sera présidé par Madame Nolin Smith, représentante de la région Europe, et Monsieur Celestino Peter Balama de la région Afrique. Maintenant, j'invite les autres membres du comité, s'ils le veulent, à participer à ce groupe de travail. La liste est ouverte. Ok, j'ouvre la liste maintenant aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Suisse, États-Unis, Royaume-Uni, Allemagne, Brésil, Canada, Afrique du Sud, Chine, Belgique, République démocratique populaire de Laos, Zambie, Gabon, Kenya, Espagne, Fédération de Russie, Thaïlande, République de Corée, Ghana, Indonésie, Singapour, Italie, Malaisie, Irlande, France, Zimbabwe, Union européenne, Tanzanie, Inde et Portugal. Union européenne, vous pouvez annuler votre demande. Je vous ai déjà cité, il me semble. Merci. Maintenant, on passe aux observateurs. Alors, nous avons Violin Makers, PSFI, Forest Based, League of American Orchestra, SSN, ONUDC, Taylor's Guitars, Traffic, IWPA, ITTO, European Sound Makers, IPCI-FR. Violine Makers, vous pouvez annuler votre demande de prise de parole. Je vous ai déjà cité. Merci. Le groupe de travail est ainsi constitué. Le point à l'ordre du jour 17 est clos. Nous passons au point 22, espèces d'arbres produisant du bois de rose. Ce document préparé par le secrétariat nous est présenté par le secrétariat. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. This document reports on implementation of decisions 20.233 to 20.235 on rosewood tree species, and it seeks the committee's guidance on priorities for future revisions of rosewood report. In implementation of decision 20.233, directed to the Secretariat, and in particular its paragraph B, the Secretariat issued notification number 2026/036, inviting feedback on the Rosewood report. Responses from 8 parties are synthesized in the annex, covering proposed additions to the priority species list, information gaps in individual fact sheets, structural improvements to the fact sheets template and the report, stronger linkages with Module 10 of the NDF guidance, and cross-cutting issues such as illegal trade data, identification tools, and treatment of source codes. To support the committee's implementation of Decision 20.235, directed to the Plans Committee, the Secretariat has organize the feedback into 12 guiding questions in paragraph 10. To help focus the committee's advice to the Secretariat on priorities for future revisions subject to available funding. On this basis, the Plans Committee is invited to establish an in-session working group as per paragraph 11 of the working group. 2A, consider the document and the annex, which contain the full substance of the parties' feedback. B, draft recommendations to the Secretariat using the questions in paragraph 10 as a basis. And C, report back to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie le secrétariat pour cette présentation. Je donne maintenant la parole aux membres du comité. Région Amérique du Nord.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North America region supports implementation of decisions 20-233 to 235 and recognize the value of the Rosewood report and fact sheets as reference tools. Given the breadth and technical nature of this agenda item, we do not consider that an in-session working group can realistically address all elements of the document within the available time frame. We therefore recommend that the in-session working group focus on identifying and addressing the issues that can be covered now and recommending an appropriate approach for any further intersessional work under Decision 20.233. The parties have already identified the taxa to be prioritized for the present intersession at COM20. Therefore, the committee's discussion should focus on implementation of those priorities rather than reopening the prioritization exercise. The responses to the notification include both comments relevant to revision of existing report, and suggestions for the broader technical work and implementation support. The Plans Committee may wish the working group to distinguish between any corrections or clarifications needed to support the use of existing report as a reference tool and recommendations that will require further consideration through existing CITES processes or future party direction. In developing the intersessional plan, we suggest the in-session working group, 1, to take a measured approach to limit intersessional work to the minimum needed. 2, distinguish between substantive revisions to the existing report or fact sheets and new work that will require additional direction and approval from the parties before any action could be taken. 3, make use of existing CITES processes and mechanisms rather than creating parallel approaches. 4, consider how the Neotropical and African tree species working groups can contribute to any intersessional work alongside existing CITES mechanisms. And 5, clarify the purpose and intended scope of the prioritization exercise, including how it relates to other CITES priority setting processes, before recommending additional taxa or proposing further technical work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la région Amérique du Nord. Y a-t-il d'autres membres du comité qui souhaiteraient s'exprimer ou faire des commentaires sur les propositions faites par le représentant de l'Amérique du Nord? Je vois Europe, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to support the suggestions by the North American region representative. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante de la région Europe. Anne, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. India welcomes the Secretariat's progress in implementing Decision 20.233 to 21.235 and supports the continued development of the report of a science-based and practical resource to assist parties in preparing NDF and implementing Article 14 of the Convention. India supports the India supports the updating of species fact sheet using the latest scientific information, national forest inventories, and management experience, while ensuring the species prioritization remains evidence-based and proportionate to the conservation status, trade levels, and implementation challenges. Thank you, Chair.
Merci aux représentants de l'Inde. Parti ayant statut d'observateur, vous avez toujours la parole. Indonésie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia appreciates the comprehensive work prepared by the Secretariat and welcomes the opportunity to comment on the future revision of the Rosewood Report. Indonesia wishes to underline 3 key points. First, any revision of the report should maintain a risk-based approach grounded in actual trade data. Priority setting must continue to rely on population information, verified trade records, seizure data, and forest management unit level management information. These elements are essential for parties when preparing non-detriment findings, and Indonesia strongly supports the further strengthening of the NDF guidance, including the development of model NDF templates and practical example for timber species. Second, Indonesia considered that any proposal to upgrade species priority should be supported by clear evidence. This includes demonstrated trade pressure, population trends, and implementation challenge under Article 4. A precautionary but evidence-based approach will help ensure that prioritization remains credible and useful for parties. Third, on the possible expansion of the report scope beyond leguminosae, we view that such expansion should only be considered when adequate data, expertise, and resources are available. Without this, broadening the scope may dilute the effectiveness of the report and complicate implementation for many ring states. Finally, Indonesia supports continued development of wood identification tools and global traceability system. These instruments are increasingly important for enforcement and for ensuring that legal and sustainable supply chains can be verified across borders. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à la représentante de l'Indonésie. Brésil, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would prefer to follow the mandate for the in-session working group as it was proposed in the document. We believe that we should debate the items proposed, and should the task proves to be too challenging, then we could set a way forward, but then we would identify what is this that we are aiming too high. I think that we don't have clarity now, and this will be defined during the discussions in the session working group. Brazil supports revising the Rosewood report to refine its priorities and strengthen its role as a practical reference for Article 4 implementation. We strongly support, in this context, elevating Pau-Brasilia equinata to the high priority category. The species presents a unique combination of characteristics that clearly justify this treatment. It is the subject of a comprehensive set of decisions adopted by COP20, reflecting its exceptional conservation and implementation challenges. And the species-specific work already mandated by COP20, including the development of a traceability study and the definition of an appropriate conversion factor, addresses specific operational implementation questions, while a high-priority fact sheet would consolidate the broader scientific, conservation, and trade information needed to support Article 4. These work streams are therefore complementary and mutually reinforcing. The question before the committee is not whether Pau-Brasilia equinata deserves special attention that has already been recognized by the Conference of the Parties. The question is whether the Rosewood report should reflect that priority. Brazil considers that it should. Brazil also strongly supports expanding the scope of the report beyond leguminosae, as envisioned in Decision 20.233 and reflected in the Secretariat's note. This would enable the report to evolve into a more comprehensive technical reference for CITES-listed tropical timber species facing comparable conservation and implementation challenges. In particular, Brazil supports inclusion of Cedrela odorata and Androanthus ceratifolia among the high-priority species. Both are CITES-listed tropical timber species of a major international commercial importance and present significant implementation challenges that would clearly benefit from the same structured technical approach already applied to priority rosewood species. Brazil also supports inclusion of Dipteryx odorata in future revisions of the report. Brazil notes that its recent national NDF for CITES-listed timber species, published in June 2026, highlighted accurate species-level identification as a key implementation issue. In the case of genera such as Androanthus, Tabebuia, and Dipteryx, several species may be traded under broad common names, while the conservation status, population structure, and sustainability of harvest may differ significantly among taxa. Where NDF outcomes are unfavorable for certain species, the ability to distinguish them from other commercially similar species become essential to ensure that conservation measures are effectively implemented and that vulnerable populations are not inadvertently placed at further risk. More broadly, Brazil considers that future prioritization should continue to be guided by objective criteria, including conservation status, the significance and trends of international trade, pressure on wide populations, and practical challenges implementing Article 4. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la représentante du Brésil. Je donne la parole à l'Allemagne.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Germany believes that while everything is desirable, which is being asked for in the document on rosewood timber, we have to assure that we can swallow what we put into our mouth. I mean, this is a lot. In addition, as I've been assigned to be co-chair of the intersessional working group on non-determined findings, I would like to stress that number 8, linkages with CITES NDF guidance, has an overlap with the task of the intersessional working group. And whatever the decision finally is, I think work in parallel on the same should be avoided. Thank you very much.
Merci aux représentants de l'Allemagne. Je donne la parole aux États-Unis.
Thank you, Chair. The United States is also concerned at the potential breadth and expansion of this report, which in our view was not intended to be an ongoing report. I think the consultation period ended. One of our concerns surrounds the notification to parties in which, these decisions were intended to be stepwise process, and decision 20.233 had paragraphs A, B, and C. Paragraph A was to provide a way forward for this intercession for the Secretariat to focus on capacity building for certain species, because we hadn't gotten to the point where we could clarify them any further. So the parties agreed that the medium and high priority taxa could be a focus this intercession. Paragraph B was intended to reach out to parties to look at the Rosewood report that had not previously been reviewed by parties, and to just find out, is there anything in there that you don't agree with or that's missing, as well as additional information that, might address those issues. Paragraph C was then directed to the Plants Committee, and we were directed to do sub 1 through, I think, 4. Well, unfortunately, those sub-items got included in the questionnaire to parties. So parties got asked all of these additional questions that we feel were not the intention of the decision, but rather was the role of the Plants Committee to look at, based on party input, for how to go forward. And so on that basis, I think we are concerned about a continued expansion of this effort. And would certainly urge discussions to consider that. And we support, of course, North America Region's intervention on that point. And if I may, just since we're in plenary, explain about the title of the report, because the United States is the reason for that. We noticed that the Rosewood report had, between the first version and the last version, had included a case study on kaya. Kaya is not a legume, and so we observed that there was a non-legume species in the report, and that the title of the report should be changed. And I believe it was another member of the committee, who's maybe Europe, who suggested it could be changed by just deleting the family name off the title. The intention there wasn't so that we could continue adding species called rosewood. Again, this is a scientific committee, and and the pursuit of information based on a common name is actually very unscientific. And so we would just urge that the idea was not to change the title in order to continue expanding the scope of the report. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante des États-Unis. Y a-t-il des observateurs qui voudraient s'exprimer avant qu'on trouve une décision? Le Canada voudrait s'exprimer, donc partie ayant statut d'observateur. Canada, vous avez la parole.
I would like to align with the United States. I think that there's a lot of ongoing discussions here, as well as Germany. There's a lot of ongoing items that have synergies with other agenda items. If we're talking about prioritizing tree species and coming up with a list, it shouldn't proceed under the Rosewood agenda item. So as we consider the mandate for the working group, perhaps we can separate between things that can be solved at this in-session working group, and then identifying other items which might be better suited to follow under other agenda items, which may include NDF guidance. It may include neotropical and African tree species. There's a number of different agenda items where these can continue, but if we're talking about ongoing work, Canada doesn't think that it should fall under this particular agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à la représentante du Canada. Irlande.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in my intervention on Friday, I neglected to congratulate you and to thank the Secretariat as is courtesy. I think there's a danger that we are going to end up discussing something which would take up the whole 4 days in its own right. And from that point of view, Ireland would align itself with Canada and with the US and with Mexico. There are many other topics relating to tree species that do merit discussion, but I don't think we're going to solve those problems by having a sort of a general catch-all discussion on trees generally in CITES, and we're certainly not going to do that in 1 or 2 sessions of an in-session working group. Thank you.
Merci aux représentants de l'Irlande. Je pense qu'on a recueilli suffisamment de points de vue des parties pour pouvoir conclure. J'aimerais savoir si les observateurs voudraient ajouter des éléments pour qu'on puisse peaufiner notre réflexion. Non, donc on va bientôt conclure sur ce point. Merci. Avant de conclure, le secrétariat aimerait apporter quelques précisions. Donc, secrétariat, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder that we understand that it could be interpreted as being a lot of work, but the intention of the questionnaire that we included in paragraph 10 is to make sure that we are supporting a more structured discussion during the working group. So perhaps it would be useful to understand which elements or which questions that are raised in paragraph 10 are considered pertinent or not relevant at this stage, as well as which ones could be delegated, if appropriate, for further intersessional work. We're not requesting this to be necessarily clarified in plenary, but that can be an opening discussion during the working group to look into the questions in paragraph 10 and first have a reflection of which ones are pertinent at this stage before going ahead into the substance and collating feedback on each of them.
Merci, secrétariat, pour ces précisions. Donc, je vais établir le groupe de travail en session avec le mandat tel que stipulé dans le paragraphe 11 du document PC 28, Doc 22, mais avec l'amendement suivant au paragraphe C qui se lirait maintenant comme suit: rendre compte de ses travaux au comité, y compris des recommandations sur tout travail intersession qui pourrait s'avérer nécessaire le cas échéant. Voilà, ça serait le mandat aussi durant les travaux du groupe de travail. Si vous avez d'éventuels commentaires, recommandations qui pourraient être traitées durant l'intercession, elles seraient les bienvenues. Je ne vois pas d'objection sur ce mandat amendé. Et donc, ce groupe de travail serait présidé par Sonia Danda, le représentant suppléant de la région Europe. J'invite maintenant les membres du comité qui désirent participer à ce groupe de travail de se manifester. Ok, parti ayant statut d'observateur. Je demande à Violine Makers de retirer sa demande parce que pour l'instant, je gère les membres voilà, ayant statut de parti ayant statut d'observateur. Alors, Irlande, Allemagne, Canada, Brésil, Chine, Royaume-Uni, Espagne, Indonésie, France, États-Unis, République démocratique Laos, Portugal, Ghana, Inde. Voilà. Maintenant, la liste est ouverte pour les observateurs. Irlande et Inde, pouvez-vous retirer votre... Merci. Alors, Forest Based, League American of Orchestra, Traffic, WWF, Taylor's Guitars, Forest Based, j'ai déjà dit. Violin Makers, SSN, IPCI-FR, ITTO, IWPA, SA Taxi et à titre de parti ayant statut d'observateur, Fédération de Russie. Je vous remercie. Merci. Le point à l'ordre du jour, PC 28, Doc 22 est clos. Nous passons maintenant au point 24. Pau Brasilia Equinata. Je donne la parole au secrétariat.
Thank you, Chair. This document provides the Plants Committee with information on the implementation of the decisions on Pau Brasilia Equinata, and in particular on the responses received to notification 2026/035 issued in March this year. The document summarizes responses received under 4 key headings: traceability systems, stockpiles, conversion factors, and production systems. Annex 3 contains draft terms of reference for a study on harmonized traceability approaches for Pau Brasilia Equinata specimens, while Annex 4 contains draft terms of reference to develop standard conversion factors for Pau Brasilia Equinata. In the recommendations in paragraph 22, the Plants Committee is invited to establish an in-session working group to consider these terms of references and possible concerns relating to the application of source codes A and Y, and report back to the plenary. Thank you, Chair.
Merci au secrétariat. Donc, membres du comité, vous avez la parole.
Is now ready.
Ok, je donne la parole aux représentants de la région Amérique du Nord. Vous êtes prêts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region supports establishing an in-session working group and consider that its mandate should ensure that the technical work on the decisions 20239 to 20243 on Pau Brasilia Equinata is appropriately scoped and informed by available information. We know that Annexes 1 and 2 to document 24 contain substantial technical information and encourage the working group to consider this material together with other relevant available technical information before refining the terms of reference or developing related outputs. With respect to conversion factors, the North American region believes that any conversion relationships should be disaggregated by production stage, such as from the whole logs to sawn wood and form sawn wood or bowl blanks, etc. We would also like to confirm how the conversion relationships will be used. Is this intended to assist management authorities in assessing what can be developed from the stockpiles, such as for the international trade or any pre-convention wood? We also note that both the Plants Committee and the Standing Committee have complementary roles in implementing these decisions and encourage close coordination between these committees. Finally, we recognize the importance of collaboration among key stakeholders and their engagement in these discussions to ensure a legal and traceable trade of products, avoiding impacts on the wild population of this endangered endemic species of Brazil. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la région Amérique du Nord. Membres du comité, vous avez la parole. Donc, la liste est ouverte pour les partis ayant statut d'observateur. Brésil, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil considers that the terms of reference should be strengthened to ensure that the studies produce practical tools to address the current implementation challenges related to pau-brasil echinacea. Brazil currently has no legal harvest of native pau-brasil echinacea for new ball production. Nearly no recognized valid pre-convention national stocks for this purpose, and existent planted areas have not yet been confirmed as a mature source suitable for bowl making. Therefore, the main concern is the use of stocks held in other countries to justify new production or to conceal material of illegal origin. Brazil suggests that the traceability study develop recommendations for an international, harmonized, and verifiable system covering stocks, bowl blanks, sticks, and bowls, including minimal requirements for registration, marking, stock deduction, linkage between material and raw material, and finished products, on-site inspections or independent audits, and objective criteria to distinguish whether products originate from pre-convention materials. Regarding the conversion factor, Brazil recalls that the COP mandated the development of an average conversion factor. Any reference to assessing the feasibility of developing such a factor is therefore inconsistent with the decisions adopted by COP20 and should be removed from PC 28.24 and its annexes, including the draft terms of reference. The in-session working group should focus on improving the methodology and technical approach for developing the conversion factor, rather than entertaining a debate on whether it is feasible. Brazil has already provided initial reference values based on general data for Brazilian tropical timber species. Where species-specific data are not yet available, existing technical reference used in Brazilian forest control systems may serve as initial parameters for consistency checks. Brazil looks forward to engaging constructively in the in-session working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la représentante du Brésil. Vous avez parlé d'un mandat qui doit être renforcé. Avez-vous des propositions à cet effet pour qu'on soumette aux membres du comité? Non? Vous avez la parole.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Actually, I was referring to strengthening the terms of reference that are going to be discussed during the in-session working group, which are both in Annex 3 and 4 of the present document. Thank you.
Merci. Après le Brésil, la parole est également ouverte aux autres parties ayant statut d'observateur. Et les observateurs, vous avez la parole. Ah, États-Unis.
Thank you, Chair. I think we recognize what Brazil is trying to say in terms of the feasibility of developing a guidance on the technical criteria. That's in paragraph B. I think the word feasibility is a problem there for them, and I could agree that it could probably use some clarification. From our perspective, we were concerned that any terminology we should be careful not to use absolute terms because conversion factors are relative. There is no standard conversion factor and there never will be. What the committee can do is arrive at good estimates or ranges and then talk about the parameters under which those might be applicable. And so perhaps instead of talking about the feasibility of developing them, it could be the parameters involved in developing them. And that way we can sort of outline what the scientific basis would be for that and then move forward from there to try to come up with those actual conversion factors. Thank you.
Merci, États-Unis. Je redonne la parole au Brésil.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the distinguished delegate from the United States. We would prefer during the recommendations and the mandate for the establishment of the in-session working group to keep with the decisions from the COP and the wording that was agreed there. For those who were engaged in this negotiation in Samarkand, we remember that it was a very difficult balance to strike, and the wording was carefully crafted. And we have in decision 20.240 directed to Secretariat that in consultation with the Plants Committee, we should create guidance which would support the development of a standard conversion factor that will be developed by the Plants Committee. And on decision 20.241, directed to the Plants Committee, we have the Plants Committee shall, letter C, Roman 3, develop an average conversion factor to define the number of boughs that can be produced by a certain volume of wood for both whole logs and sawwood. So we would prefer to stick to the wording of the decisions of the COP. That was a mandate from the COP to the Plants Committee and the Secretariat. Thank you very much.
Je vais donc établir le groupe de travail, sachant que nous avons encore 2 ou 3 groupes de travail à établir, donc ça va être très rapide. La conclusion est la suivante. Le comité pour les plantes convient d'établir un groupe de travail de session ayant le mandat suivant. A. Examiner et affiner les termes de référence figurant aux annexes 3 et 4 du présent document en tenant compte des informations techniques figurant aux annexes 1 et 2. Et petit b, examiner la version actualisée du guide sur l'application des codes sources de la CITES. En fait, ce qui se passe, c'est que dans les recommandations, 22A et 22B sont combinés en un seul paragraphe qui est celui que je lis de nouveau. Examiner et affiner les termes de référence figurant aux annexes 3 et 4 du présent document en tenant compte des informations techniques figurant aux annexes 1 et 2. Et le paragraphe B inchangé. Et le paragraphe B correspond au paragraphe C inchangé et le petit d est maintenu. Est-ce que c'est clair? Océanie, j'ai vu que vous aviez demandé la parole. Rapide.
Thank you, Chair. Would you mind running through that one more time, just to be clear on what the mandate is now?
Le mandat du groupe de travail est le suivant. Examiner et affiner les termes de référence figurant aux annexes 3 et 4 du présent document en tenant compte des informations techniques figurant aux annexes 1 et 2. C'est une combinaison des paragraphes A et B. Ainsi, l'ancien paragraphe C devient paragraphe B et l'ancien paragraphe D devient paragraphe C. C'est clair? C. Océanie, de nouveau.
Thank you, Chair. So just to be clear, we're updating the draft terms of reference to no longer refer to the feasibility because the document that's in the annex is titled a feasibilities working group on feasibility.
Remove the feasibility.
En fait, au sein du groupe de travail, vous pouvez affiner, c'est pour ça qu'on a dit affiner dans le paragraphe 22A, ce que j'ai lu là. Examiner et affiner les termes de référence, c'est à ce moment-là, vous avez le libre arbitre de le faire. Voilà. Brésil, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the proposal, but I believe that we are missing many elements that were in the original mandate that was proposed in the Secretariat, by the Secretariat. For instance, in the first line, we see that we would provide inputs to inform further consultation with the Standing Committee, and this is not in the mandate anymore. I'm not sure if we agree with the whole linguistic acrobatics that we are doing here with this mandate, because for Brazil, we would be happy to go with the mandate as it is, just striking out the feasibility word on 22B, second line. And I think there are a lot of elements that we are missing with the new proposal. Thank you.
Océanier, rapidement.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive of Brazil's approach. I think we need to be clear about what the mandate is. If we are going to revert back to the original recommended text, I support removing feasibility so that the mandate of the working group is more in line with the decisions. But what I would point out is that the decisions talk about wood and logs in general, not just from stockpiles, like paragraph C, so under the decision, 20.241, paragraph C, it talks about identifying conversion factors for certain volume of wood for both whole logs and sawn wood, whereas the as it stands now, it's only talking about stockpiles. So I think we just need to be clear that we're not changing what was in the original decision as far as what the conversion factor refers to.
Merci Océanie et Brésil pour les remarques que vous venez de faire. Donc je me tourne vers les États-Unis. Alors je propose qu'on laisse le mandat tel que défini dans le paragraphe 22. Dans le paragraphe 22. Mais est-ce que vous pouvez nous proposer en anglais un autre mot que faisabilité? Parce que en français, en fait, ça a été traduit par possibilité. Il y a faisabilité, et là, en français, c'est possibilité. Si vous nous donnez un mot qui remplace faisabilité et qui convienne aussi bien au Brésil, Brésil dit non de la tête. Donc, États-Unis, est-ce que vous pouvez être flexible à ce moment-là, puisque c'est la décision telle qu'elle. Pour que nous puissions avancer, nous avons encore des groupes de travail à établir et nous courons après le temps.
I can't. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was live. Thank you. I don't think the translation followed, so that I missed some words that you were saying, but I guess if I could just say that I think we could support Brazil's suggestion to remove the words that relate to feasibility, and in English it could read further work on, and then delete the feasibility of, and then just continue with developing. We do take the point from Oceania about wood piles, stockpiles, and we do think that's an important distinction. Should say wood and logs. And then lastly, just that we did support and agree with your revision to mandate paragraph A to take annexes 1 and 2 into consideration, because that is a lot of technical information that will inform these this work. And so we do agree with you, including after the words in paragraph A, after the word Annex 3, comma, bearing in mind technical information in Annexes 1 and 2, comma. And we will defer to you on the best way forward. Thank you.
Je vais donner la parole au secrétariat parce qu'il semble que la proposition que j'ai faite permettait de diluer certaines informations. Donc, on va peut-être revenir à la version initiale. Secrétariat, allez-y.
Thank you, Chair. So it will read, the Plans Committee agreed to establish an in-session working group with the mandate to, taking into consideration the technical information in Annexes 1 and 2, consider the terms of reference in Annex 3 to the present document and provide inputs to inform further consultation with the Standing Committee through its chair for the finalization of the terms of reference for the study called for under decision 20.240, paragraph C, Roman 2, little I. Consider the terms of reference in Annex 4 to the present document and provide inputs to inform the finalization of the terms of reference to undertake further work on developing guidance on technical criteria to classify the wood suitable for bow making, which would support the development of a standard conversion factor to assist parties in reporting the number of bows that can be produced by wood stockpiles, differentiating between sawn wood and whole logs. Consider the updated guide to the application of CITES source codes and identify whether there are specific concerns relating to the application of source codes A and Y for Brasilia echinata for consideration by the range state and importing parties, and report back to the Plants Committee.
Merci, secrétariat. Donc là, vous avez eu la lecture de la proposition du mandat du groupe de travail. Est-ce que cela vous convient? Brésil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the Secretariat be so kind of repeating 22A, which was a little faster for us? Thank you.
Secrétariat.
Thank you, Chair. Consider the terms of reference in Annex 3 to the present document and provide inputs to inform further consultation with the Standing Committee through its chair for the finalization of the terms of reference for the study called for under decision 20.240, paragraph C, little I.
C'est bon, Brésil. États-Unis. C'est parfait. Donc, membre du comité Océanie. Océanie.
Thank you, Chair. I think the only thing that has dropped out from what we were talking about before was in the bit where you said, consider the terms of reference in Annex 3 to the present document. Previously, we talked about saying something along the lines of bearing in mind information in Annex 1 and 2.
Ça sera dans le chapeau.
Okay.
OK. Merci. Merci à tous. Donc, le point est clos. Je pensais qu'on avait déjà tout fini parce que... Donc, OK, maintenant, le mandat est lu. On va... La présidence du groupe de travail, ça sera Monsieur César Augusto Belteton, chacun de la région Amérique centrale du Sud et Caraïbes, et Madame Hélène du Canada. Membres du comité qui souhaitent prendre part à ce groupe de travail. Donc, conformément au plan de travail, il y a Madame Marie-Ève Paquet, suppléante pour l'Amérique du Nord, qui serait membre. Y aurait-il d'autres membres? Non. Alors, parti ayant... Oui, Océanie. Océanie. OK. Maintenant, parti ayant statut d'observateur. Allemagne, Brésil, Suisse, Irlande, France. Portugal, Australie, Espagne, Royaume-Uni, États-Unis, Italie, Canada, Belgique, Union européenne, Fédération de Russie. Observateur. SSN, WWF, Forest Based, League of American Orchestra, CFI, Violin Makers, IPCI, FR, ITTU. Et parmi les parties, il faut rajouter la République de Corée. Toutes mes excuses aux observateurs à qui je n'ai pas donné la parole tout à l'heure pour recueillir leurs commentaires, mais nous sommes vraiment pressés par le temps et j'espère que je ne vous oublierai pas prochainement. Merci. Alors, nous passons maintenant au point suivant qui concerne les plantes, le commerce des plantes médicinales et aromatiques. Le secrétariat, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. This document concerns trade in MAP species and has 4 elements. First, it submits for the committee's review the revised study on CITES-listed medicinal and aromatic plant species in international trade contained in Annex 1. Second, Annex 2 contains inputs from the Plants Committee nomenclature specialists and UNEP WCMC, which could inform whether corrections to the nomenclature in the CITES checklist and trade database are necessary. Third, the implementation of cross-references between the CITES checklist, the CITES trade database, and the medicinal plant name services for CITES-listed maps, taking into account the technical advice that the Plants Committee already agreed at its 26th meeting, which is all subject to external funding. And the last element relates to Annex 3 that contains the draft resolution on medicinal and aromatic plants discussed at PC 27, which the committee is directed to consider under decision 20.245. The Secretariat recommends in paragraph 11 of the document that the nomenclature matters in Annex 2 be referred to the in-session working group on nomenclature to be established later during the session, and that the consideration of a draft resolution be taken forward through an intersessional working group that will report back to PC 29. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, secrétariat. Je donne la parole aux membres du comité. Je pense que pour aller plus vite, nous allons procéder étape par étape. Donc, nous allons d'abord examiner le paragraphe 11A du document PC 28, Doc 25. Je recueille vos commentaires. Asie, vous avez la parole.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And we thank the Secretariat Traffic and Kew Gardens for this timely study. The Asian region appreciates this effort, and we congratulate the team on completing this complex work. In reviewing the report, we understand that resources are limited. However, Asia would simply like to share a few points for the committee to bear in mind. First, the study draws primarily on MPNS, which tracks medicinal uses. However, aromatic, cosmetic, and food uses are not covered. This was noted when the terms of reference were first discussed. Second, the study applies an unstated norm to be standard to filter the trade data. For example, Galanthus has trade records for extracts in the CITES trade database and is a documented source of galantamine used for Alzheimer's disease. So yet the study characterized it as only the horticulture. Third, the study presents MPNS synonyms that CITES appendices do not use. So we understand that the in-session working group on nomenclature will address coordination mechanisms. And first, the online survey applies over 1,000 keywords without controlling for shared common names. Shared common names inflate apparent search volume and obscure which species is actually being treated, making the e-commercial monitoring data unreliable for conservation decision-making. The data may need to be revisited. In summary, data coverage should align with agreed definitions. Traditional knowledge deserves recognition, and we should be mindful of extractive pressure from the natural products industry. And online trade analysis call for careful handling of annotations, sources, and species confusion. And we will send detailed comments to the Secretariat, and we consider this study a useful reference and hope its methodological limitations will be borne in mind in future work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Asie. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole des membres du comité. Je prie les suivants interlocuteurs à être brefs dans leur déclaration. États-Unis, vous avez la parole. 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I would like to say that the United States supports providing final feedback on the revised study. We are concerned about the potential implications and emphasize the need for the proposed actions to demonstrate added value to CITES implementation. With regard to the nomenclature work for the MPNS, this is consistent with previous views that we are of our growing concerns of the continued review of external databases to serve CITES needs and to address inconsistencies with external databases within our own CITES databases. So I think we align to some extent with the comments that Asia made in terms of our concerns about that external database, and we just wanted to reiterate that we do have workload concerns as well. Lastly, with regard to the resolution, we support work to try to refine the draft resolution with the idea that it should clearly articulate why trade in MAP species presents implementation challenges and to provide specific recommendations that can support parties to address the distinct challenges, those distinct challenges from others associated with CITES listed species. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante des États-Unis. Royaume-Uni, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. We support the recommendations in the document. On the study of cited listed medicinal and aromatic plant species in international trade, the report references the Royal Botanic Gardens Q's medicinal plant names services. We submitted InfoDoc 7, which provides an update on this service. It is expanding and will be rebranded as the Plants for Health Initiative. Further details are available in the document. Thank you.
Merci. Pas d'autres demandes par les partis ayant statut d'observateur. Observateur. Alors, si j'ai bien saisi, l'Asie, les États-Unis, vous avez fait des commentaires globaux, ainsi que le Royaume-Uni sur l'ensemble des recommandations au point 11. Donc, le comité prend note des observations formulées en plénière. Le comité prend note du point 11A et je vais établir les groupes de travail. Donc, le groupe de travail en session, s'il est établi, il sera envoyé au groupe de travail nomenclature. C'est bien ça. Ok. Donc, le comité convient d'établir un groupe de travail en session sur la nomenclature qui sera ajouté au mandat du groupe de travail nomenclature qui va être établi au point 31. Maintenant, concernant la recommandation C, nous allons établir maintenant un groupe de travail intercession sur les plantes médicinales et aromatiques qui travaillera par voie électronique avec le mandat défini au paragraphe 11C du document. Alors, les présidents proposés sont ceux qui ont été agréés dans le plan de travail, le programme de travail de 2026-2029. Il s'agit de Doreen Smith de l'Europe et de Yan Zheng de l'Asie. Voilà. Nous passons maintenant aux autres membres du groupe de travail, aux autres membres du comité qui souhaitent participer au groupe de travail. La liste est ouverte. Océanie. Afrique. Maintenant, je passe la parole aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Europe également. Donc, Irlande, Suisse, Indonésie, États-Unis, République démocratique populaire de Laos, Royaume-Uni, Fédération de Russie, Australie, Chine, République de Corée, Allemagne, Lituanie, Zimbabwe, Afrique du Sud, Slovaquie, Tanzanie, Canada, Brésil, Zambie, Zimbabwe, Inde. Merci. Observateur. Inde, je vous ai cité. Oui. Alors, UICN, WWF, Trafic, American Herbal Products, International Fragrance. Anne, votre micro est toujours allumé. Voilà. Donc, le groupe de travail intercession est ainsi établi. Ce point est clos. Bon. C'était donc le présent point de l'ordre du jour demeure ouvert uniquement pour le paragraphe qui a trait à l'établissement de groupes de travail en session dans l'attente du rapport que présentera le groupe de travail sur la nomenclature. OK. Nous passons au point suivant, le point porté par le document PC28 Doc 32. Je donne la parole au Cameroun pour présenter ce document. Je vous remercie. Je vous demanderai d'être bref dans votre présentation, étant donné que nous avons encore un point très lourd à examiner. Donc, si vous pouvez me le faire en 3 minutes, ça serait bien. Merci.
C'est bon. Merci, Madame la Présidente, de la parole donnée. Nous allons faire effectivement l'effort d'être bref parce que nous l'avons prévu en 3 pages. Disons, Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Comité pour les plantes, distingués délégués et chers observateurs, la délégation du Cameroun a l'honneur de présenter le document PC28 Doc 32 dans sa version révisée. Ce document traite d'une question de gouvernance de la donnée scientifique à travers un cas concret, la présence rapportée au Cameroun de Gibutia pellegriniana, l'un des 3 boubingas africains inscrits à l'index 2 depuis la COP 17. La question peut paraître ponctuelle, elle touche pourtant au fondement même de la mise en œuvre de la Convention, laquelle repose sur les meilleures informations scientifiques disponibles, au premier rang desquelles l'identité et la répartition exacte des taxons commercialisés. Permettez-moi d'énoncer la conclusion avant d'en exposer le fondement. En l'état actuel, les connaissances, aucune preuve primaire vérifiable n'établit la présence de Gibutia pellegriniana au Cameroun. Cette conclusion procède du retour de l'examen des spécimens d'herbier, la seule preuve qui, en matière de répartition face autorité, 3 éléments convergent. Le spécimen type. Sa consultation directe établit qu'il s'agit du spécimen ETS 21, récolté près de Libreville au Gabon et décrit par Léonard en 1949. Dans sa description originale, l'espèce n'a aucun lien avec le territoire camerounais. La révision des spécimens d'herbier, l'ensemble des spécimens de Gibutia du Cameroun, conservés au Royal Botanic Garden, qui est référencé dans le GBIF, a été réexaminé. Aucun ne correspond à Gibutia pellegriniana. Tous relèvent de Gibutia demesei. Quant au spécimen nigérian portant ce nom, il relève de Didellotia africana, un genre distinct. La littérature primaire, la flore du Gabon et la fiche technique du Centre technique forestier tropical traitent l'espèce comme gabonaise. Les flores critiques du Cameroun ne la mentionnent pas. Chaque spécimen examiné se résout ainsi en un autre taxon. La délégation n'affirme pas l'impossibilité d'une découverte future. Elle constate simplement qu'à ce jour, aucun voucher fertile ne vient étayer l'attribution camerounaise et qu'il reviendrait dès lors, en toute rigueur scientifique, à une éventuelle affirmation concrète d'apporter un matériel de référence comparable. Comment dès lors l'attribution camerounaise a-t-elle pu s'établir? Le document en retrace l'origine. Elle procède de 2 erreurs d'identification séparées de 8 années. En 1950, un spécimen récolté à Calabar est rattaché à l'espèce. Il s'agit en réalité de Didellotia africana. En 1958, la Flora of West Tropical Africa cite sous ce nom un spécimen de South Bakundu au Cameroun. Il s'agit de Gibutia demesei. C'est cette seconde erreur qui fait entrer le Cameroun dans l'aire de répartition de l'espèce. Ces 2 identifications ont ensuite été reprises sans retour au spécimen par la littérature technique, puis par la proposition d'inscription de 2016. puis par les grandes bases de données internationales, chacune s'appuyant sur les précédentes. Une apparence de consensus s'est ainsi formée. Il convient toutefois de rappeler que la répétition d'une même donnée dans plusieurs bases ne saurait valoir plusieurs preuves indépendantes. Il s'agit d'une seule et même donnée citée à plusieurs reprises. La délégation tient, par souci de transparence, à porter un point à l'attention du comité. La version initiale de ce document avançait une hypothèse fondée sur la localité type et sur un argument géohistorique. La consultation du protologue puis la révision des spécimens conduite par Q ont conduit à écarter cette hypothèse au profit d'une explication mieux étayée. La délégation a donc rectifié son propre document. Elle considère que c'est précisément ce que la Convention attend d'une autorité scientifique, suivre la preuve primaire là où elle mène, y compris lorsqu'elle infirme une analyse antérieure. C'est l'exigence que ce document recommande au comité. Il était juste que la délégation se l'applique d'abord à elle-même. La délégation souhaite lever d'emblée toute ambiguïté. Le Cameroun ne demande aucun déclassement de Gibucha Pellegriniana. Aucun déclassement. Gibucha Pellegriniana demeure inscrite à l'annexe 2 et son objectif de conservation reste pleinement fondé. Le Cameroun ne met nullement en cause le Gabon ni l'Union européenne, dont il salue au concret l'initiative. Auteur de la proposition 56, ils en ont pleinement atteint le but. Le point soulevé est d'ordre documentaire et sa correction renforce le dispositif de la Convention plutôt qu'elle ne l'affaiblit. Sur cette base, la délégation invite respectueusement le comité à prendre note de la révision des spécimens conduite par le Royal Botanic Garden Q et de la correction déjà opérée dans Plants of Words Online. Appuyer l'ajout d'une note explicative à la fiche de l'espèce dans Species Plus, ainsi que le réexamen de la référence de répartition qui y est citée. Saisir le comité de la nomenclature de l'absence de référence normalisée CITES pour Gibucha de Musée et Gibucha tesmani, les deux espèces réellement concernées par le commerce. Encourager enfin l'introduction dans les référentiels normatifs de la Convention d'indicateurs de niveau de preuve associés aux données de répartition, distinguant les données primaires et des données agrégées ou inférées. Ce travail lève enfin une préoccupation soulevée dans le cadre de l'étude du commerce important. La confusion possible entre espèces est désormais résolue. Le Bubinga exploité au Cameroun se rapporte à Gibucha tesmani et à Gibucha de Musée, deux espèces distinctement codées dans le système national de traçabilité camerounais. Aucun Gibucha pellegriniana n'entre dans le commerce camerounais. En conséquence, le Cameroun recommande au comité de retenir pour la combinaison Gibucha tesmani Cameroun la conclusion combinaison espèce-pays moins préoccupante et d'accepter le quota d'exportation 2025 de 255,111 m3 établi sur les titres d'exploitation de l'année et fondé sur l'avis de commerce non préjugeable soumis à fins utiles. La délégation camerounaise exprime sa reconnaissance au Royal Botanic Garden Q et en particulier au Dr Sander van der Berg, dont l'examen des spécimens a permis de résoudre cette question. Cette collaboration illustre précisément ce que le présent document appelle de ses voeux la résolution d'une incertitude réglementaire par le retour au matériel primaire. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente, de votre bienveillante attention et me tiens avec la délégation à l'entière disposition du comité pour toute question.
Merci aux délégués du Cameroun. Je donne maintenant la parole aux différents membres du comité. Alors, je donne la parole à la spécialiste à la région Amérique du Nord.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In document 32, Cameroon provides documentary evidence that Gibutia pellegriniana does not occur in Cameroon and underscores the importance of distinguishing between verifiable primary data and secondary information. The North American region appreciates the information presented by Cameroon and welcomes the reminder that proposals should be grounded in scientifically robust assessments. We note that Cameroon has provided a rigorous assessment to correct the range distribution for Gibutia pellegriniana. that could support removing them as a range country for these species. We would like to inquire about the current process around how the distributions in CITES checklist species are currently assessed and whether a process is needed to issue future corrections. Additionally, we would like to invite UNIP WCMC to take this information into account if they review these species. For recommendations 1 to 7, the North American region considers this should be reviewed by the nomenclature specialist on plants so she can provide advice to the committee. The in-session working group of nomenclature, if established under the next agenda item 31 on botanical nomenclature, could also be an appropriate forum to decide the best way forward. Either way, the North American region suggests a cautious approach so as not to add work that is already addressed in existing processes or that goes beyond the Plants Committee mandate or does not align with existing decisions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la région Amérique du Nord. Je donne maintenant la parole à la spécialiste de la nomenclature botanique du Comité pour les plantes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I fully support the value of these recommendations as general guidelines that can be applied to all species, not just the specific case. Verifying primary distribution data by reviewing herbarium specimens and their identification, as well as their locality information within a geohistorical context, is essential in any taxonomic endeavor, and it should also be essential during the compilation of a proposal to list a taxon on the CITES appendices. Remember that very little of Africa's herbarium specimens are available online in repositories such as GBIF, and the same is true for many other regions of the world. Authors of listing proposals should consult with in-country and international expertise, with the people who have access to the in-country herbarium specimens and other primary data, as well as those held in large overseas herbaria. Once a mistake is made and perpetuated in secondary literature and sources, it is difficult to correct that problem. The nomenclature specialist can assist with reviewing the nomenclature and taxonomy followed in a listing proposal, but it is not our work, nor that of the parties or the Secretariat, to verify all primary data that you have or have not used in your listing proposal. That is the responsibility of the proposal authors. And here, the recommendations in this document can act as valuable general guidelines, and this species as a case study of what can possibly go wrong if the data used is not verified. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la spécialiste de la nomenclature botanique du Comité pour les plantes. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de membres du comité. Je donne maintenant la parole aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. États-Unis.
Thank you, Chair. We support the nomenclature specialist's comments with regard to those recommendations and would reiterate that the proposal, the format for proposals to amend the appendices asks parties to pay close attention to that information, to the names of the taxa that are submitted. And I think that's why consultations with other range countries are really important. And it's certainly why the United States pays close attention to the species list that is included with proposals at the COPs because of this very problem, that this problem can happen. Granted, mistakes will continue to happen. We're talking about a lot of species and it's complicated. And so we do appreciate Cameroon's rigorous review. And of course, that's the type of work that becomes necessary once a problem is perpetuated. And so we appreciate that. And again, support the comments made so far. Thank you.
Merci États-Unis. Royaume-Uni, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, and to Cameroon for preparing this document. It did prompt the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew to review its literature and herbaceous specimens of all Gubertia specimens from Cameroon. And as summarized by Cameroon, we determined that we could not find the species there. And we did update the Plants of the World online distribution to reflect this. And so therefore we support all the comments that have followed and would also recommend that the Species Plus record for Gubertia pellegriniana is updated for its distribution. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante du Royaume-Uni. Je redonne la parole à la spécialiste de la nomenclature botanique du Comité pour les plantes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor again. So in the light of the information provided by the United Kingdom regarding the correction of distribution data for the species on their online databases, I suggest that the Secretariat and nomenclature specialist liaise with UNEP WCMC to amend this data in the CITES database. And furthermore, I support the suggestion made by the representative of North America that if there's any other matters to discuss around this, that it could be included in the mandate of the nomenclature working group that I will request under the next mandate point. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame la spécialiste de la nomenclature botanique du Comité pour les plantes pour ces précisions. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole. Y a-t-il des observateurs qui veulent s'exprimer sur ce sujet en un temps vraiment... Bon, UNEP WCMC, vous avez la parole. 2 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Nous remercions le Cameroun d'avoir préparé ce document. Étant donné la conclusion dans le document révisé que la présence de Guibourtia pellegriniana dans le pays n'a pas pu être confirmée, nous sommes en accord avec le Cameroun, la région nord-américaine et les autres parties que la répartition au Cameroun puisse être retirée de Species Plus et nous pouvons aisément effectuer ce changement. Nous souhaitons aussi profiter de cette occasion pour rappeler aux parties qu'elles peuvent contacter l'UNEP WCMC ou le secrétariat CITES à tout moment avec de la documentation à l'appui de quelconque question de répartition dans la liste des espèces CITES ou Species Plus. En tant que gestionnaire de la base de données, UNEP WCMC évaluera la documentation fournie, consultera les références taxonomiques adoptées, la littérature scientifique et, si besoin est, les spécialistes de la nomenclature pour répondre à la requête. Et le cas échéant, nous effectuerons tout changement dans les ressources en ligne. Pour répondre à la question de la région nord-américaine, les distributions entrées dans les bases de données partent des propositions d'amendement des annexes, qui sont ensuite suppléés par de la littérature scientifique plus largement si possible. Merci Madame la Présidente.
Merci à UNEP WCMC d'avoir été brève et de nous apporter des éclaircissements quant aux bases de données Species Plus. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes. Je vais procéder à la conclusion sur ce point. Ok. Alors, concernant le point PC 28, Doc 32, la conclusion est la suivante. Le comité pour les plantes, petit a, note le document, prend note du document et des recommandations qu'il contient. Document PC 28, Doc 32, Rêve 1. Demande au secrétariat et aux spécialistes de la nomenclature de corriger les informations dans les bases de données de la CITES. Et petit c, encourage les parties à vérifier les données primaires lors de l'élaboration de propositions d'amendement des annexes. Est-ce que cette conclusion convient aux membres du comité? Qui ne dit mot consent. Donc c'est adjugé. Le point est clos. Merci à tous. Avec votre soutien, nous arrivons enfin au dernier point à l'ordre du jour pour la session de l'après-midi qui concerne le point PC 28 Doc 31. C'est le rapport de la spécialiste de la nomenclature botanique. Madame, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The document 31 provides updates on the implementation of flora nomenclature-related decisions adopted by the Conference of the Parties at its 20th meeting, as well as the nomenclature work plan for the Plants Committee. So COP20 adopted, retained or revised 7 sets of decisions on nomenclature matters for flora and 2 sets of nomenclature decisions with a mandate addressed to both the Plants and the Animals Committees. The flora matters from the decisions regarding the preparation of checklists for priority taxa are also reported on here, while the decision regarding standardized global checklists were already dealt with in the joint session with the Animals Committee. So decisions regarding updates to checklists are reported on for the checklist for aloes, the checklist for cactaceae, the checklist for Appendix 2 listed orchids, nomenclature checklist for the bulb genera Cyclamen, Galanthus, and Sternbergia, the checklist for the agar wood-producing genera Aquilaria and Gyronops, and the checklist for Anacampsaros species. The Annex 1 contains a reference framework of activities intended to inform the commissioning and updating of these and future CITES checklists. Discrepancies highlighted by the analysis comparing the nomenclature and taxonomy used by CITES with that of the medicinal plant name services were also taken into consideration when drawing up this reference framework. Discussions regarding all these checklists and the reference framework will be required to ensure that parties agree with the proposed way forward. Progress with implementation of decisions relating to the nomenclature of use or taxa species is also reported on in the current document, and Annex 2 contains a first draft of an updated checklist for taxa species, including information on the taxonomic and nomenclatural complexities in taxas. Some of the proposed nomenclatural and taxonomic amendments may result in substantive changes to the CITES listings of these plants as summarized in paragraph 26, and discussions are required to decide on a way forward. Decisions regarding the preparation of checklists for priority taxa are also reported on, and a revised list of priority taxa are provided on in paragraph 43. Background information is summarized in paragraph 45 to support the proposal that time-stamped extracts be produced for Hoodia, Andrewanthes, Rosiodendron, Tababoia, the American populations of Dixonia, the family Dedieriaceae, Cedrella, and Guaiacum species. Background information is summarized in paragraph 46 to support the proposal that custom checklists be produced by experts for the tree ferns, the succulent Euphorbia species, carnivorous plants, and cycads. To ensure that parties agree with the proposed ways forward, discussions are required regarding these proposals and some possibly substantive matters for certain taxa that need to be considered. Additional nomenclature matters for flora that were included in the work plan at COP20 are outlined in paragraphs 49 and 50, and discussions regarding these topics and possible substantive matters relating to the relevant taxa will be required. The Plants Committee is invited to note the progress on implementation of these decisions, as listed in paragraph 51A, and to review and provide guidance on the matters requiring discussion listed in paragraph 51B. Madam Chair, depending on the outcomes of the discussions in plenary, I suggest for your consideration the establishment of an in-session working group in line with the recommendations contained in this document to formulate recommendations on some of these topics, including the drafting of nomenclature-related decisions where appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Madame la spécialiste de la nomenclature botanique du Comité pour les plantes, pour ce rapport fourni. Je donne maintenant la parole aux membres du comité. Vous avez the floor is yours. Amérique du Nord.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North America region would like to thank the plant nomenclature specialist for her work, for her throughout analysis and advice to inform the committee nomenclature work during this intersession. We offer the following comments and suggestions on the content and recommendations in document 31 and a proposed way forward for intersessional nomenclature discussions. Regarding recommendation A on checklist underway, we note the progress on these items and recommend allowing for further intersessional discussion before finalizing the respective work plans for Anakamceros SPP and cactaceae. We also note the plan notification to the parties on the newly adopted Alois checklist and look forward to providing input to inform intersessional discussions. We also recommend further discussions related to the attribution of custom checklists. Regarding paragraph 15(1)(bi), we support the development of a reference framework for activities to be considered when commissioning CITES checklist with the following recommendations. For activity 1, desktop study and consultation, we know that the CITES standard references are also informed by scientific names used in trade, range state strictly domestic measures, and administrative impacts for parties. Preparations should build in ample intersessional input to inform these aspects for each checklist under consideration. Regarding activity 2, elements to be included in custom checklist, Section 3 outlines essential information and additional information. We do not support the routine inclusions of annotations in CITES checklist as essential information. Annotations change independently of nomenclature, and including them could require unnecessary checklist revisions. We note that there have been exceptions such as the cactus checklist and look forward to discussing the basis for this and the appropriate time intersessionally. Similarly, we do not support including the additional info list in Section 3. Although with respect to the common names, we do not have a regional consensus and suggest this could be discussed further in the working group. Finally, Madam Chair, while the format of the checklist may be reasonably addressed by the in-session working group, Given the range and complexity of the taxa addressed in the present document, we recommend that in the in-session working group allow for further intersessional discussions on the remaining items to ensure that they are appropriately considered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la région Amérique du Nord pour ces commentaires. J'invite les prochains orateurs à rester vraiment très général, puisque vous aurez largement le temps de discuter de tous ces points dans le cadre du programme de travail, parce qu'il faut qu'on l'établisse et qu'on libère aussi les interprètes. Donc, vraiment, soyez brefs. Pour les prochains, Océanie, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania thanks the nomenclature specialists for the significant work undertaken to develop the document and the work that it represents. Oceania looks forward to identifying experts that can contribute to the discussions on ferns, in particular Cyatheaceae, under paragraph 46A, due to the significant taxonomic gaps for this group. Noting this will be a significant challenge, given the complexity associated with classification of ferns and the limited number of experts working specifically on them. Thank you, Chair.
Merci aux représentants de l'Océanie. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole. Est-ce que les partis ayant statut d'observateur souhaitent prendre la parole? Chine, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. China would like to thank the nomenclature specialist for the preparation work. China has reviewed the documents, and some technical comments will be discussed in more detail in the in-session working group. In this connection, China considers it essential that any revisions to nomenclatural references and to the checklist be undertaken with full regard to the conservation objectives of the original listing proposals to Appendix 1 and 2 species adopted by the Conference of the Parties, as well as the species distributions described by proponents at the time of adoption. Such revisions should ultimately support effective implementation of the Convention and contribute constructively to wider academic dialogue. Thank you.
Ok, merci à la représentante de la Chine. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole. Observateur. Aucune demande de parole. Merci. Nous allons conclure comme suit. Alors, le comité pour les plantes convient de prendre note des progrès établis dans la mise en œuvre des décisions précisées au paragraphe 51A ainsi que des observations formulées par la région Amérique du Nord. Le comité pour les plantes convient d'établir un groupe de travail en session avec les mandats tels que formulés dans le paragraphe 51B du document PC 28 Doc 31, ainsi que le paragraphe 11B du document PC 28 Doc 25 qui a trait aux plantes médicinales et aromatiques. Alors, ce groupe de travail sera présidé par la spécialiste de la nomenclature et j'invite les membres du comité qui souhaitent prendre part à ce groupe de travail de se prononcer. Asie. Europe. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes. Donc, je passe aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Suisse, Irlande. Canada, États-Unis, Afrique du Sud, République démocratique populaire du Laos, Royaume-Uni, République de Corée, Chine, Allemagne, Belgique, Brésil, Kenya, Ghana, Zimbabwe. Maintenant, les observateurs qui souhaitent prendre part à ce groupe de travail. Alors, parmi les parties, je rajoute l'Indonésie. Et les observateurs, nous avons UICN, UNEP WCMC, Botanical Garden International. Merci. Alors, sur ce, le point PC 20... Ah, vous voulez, Slovénie, États-Unis, vous voulez prendre part au groupe de travail, c'est ça? Ou bien, vous voulez poser une question? Bon, je vous donne la parole.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to clarify that document 25, paragraph A also is involved in paragraph B because in the decision, it talks about taking the study into consideration. So I think I heard you refer only to the mandate of the working group being paragraph B from that document. I would just ask whether or not A should be included. Thank you.
Le point 11A du document PC 28 Doc 25, nous avons juste pris note. Nous avons pris note et le mandat du groupe de travail était institué dans le paragraphe 11B. Et c'est pour ça, et comme ce paragraphe 11B, nous avions dit que nous allions établir un groupe de travail, mais que nous allons le le soumettre, l'inclure dans le groupe de travail nomenclature. C'est pour ça que je suis revenue sur ce point qui n'a pas été clos précédemment parce que celui-là est resté ouvert. C'est clair? USA, États-Unis.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to clarify that the document 25 recommendation is to consider the study in order to do B. So the study is in A. It's not to review or revise the study. It's to consider the study in paragraph A to inform how we work on paragraph B. So I just wanted to make sure it wouldn't be considered outside the mandate if we were to do that. Thank you.
Okay. Mexique, vous avez la parole.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Desafortunadamente nuestra delegación es muy pequeña y no podremos participar en el grupo de trabajo sobre nomenclatura. Así que quisiéramos que se considerara en las discusiones del grupo que México considera muy importante que se tomen en cuenta los nombres comunes en estas referencias, pues tienen valor para la implementación. Hay diferencias entre el uso de nombres comunes entre países, entre regiones, y a veces un mismo nombre científico abarca varios comunes. Si no hay manera de relacionarlos, esto puede complicar la implementación para las autoridades administrativas y científicas. Agradecemos que se tome en cuenta esta contribución de México para las discusiones del grupo. Gracias.
Merci, Mexique. États-Unis, je reviens vers vous concernant votre préoccupation. Alors, États-Unis, votre préoccupation est plus ou moins prise en compte implicitement dans le cadre du paragraphe B, parce que le paragraphe B, comme vous l'avez souligné, on ne peut pas faire cette tâche sans avoir fait le A. Et concernant le Mexique, ce que vous avez dit sera pris en compte. Voilà, dans les discussions. Merci. Donc, je peux clore le point PC 28, DOC 25, ainsi que le point PC 28, DOC 31. merci à tous. Nous avons examiné tous les points qui étaient à l'ordre du jour de cette journée de lundi. Je vous remercie pour l'efficacité de ce comité. Maintenant, je vais céder la parole au secrétariat pour des questions logistiques. Secrétariat, vous avez la parole.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Just the working group schedule has been published on the notice boards outside. So we had a provisional schedule that has now been adjusted based on the working groups that's been established. So it's very important to please take note that tomorrow morning we will start in this room with Paul Brasilia Ekenata. So we wanted to do it on Wednesday, but tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, we'll start here with Paul Brasilia Ekenata. And then in the afternoon from 2, we will have the RST new selection. So document 14.4 will be discussed here. And then for tomorrow, also in the morning, CITES and Forest will be in room number 4, which is downstairs. From 9 to 12, and then rosewood tree species will also be in room number 4, but in the afternoon from 2 to 5. The nomenclature working group will meet in room 14, which is on level 2, I think. And you have 2 sessions to finalize the work. If you can do it in one session, that will be great so that people can join the RST new selection, but that is the schedule for tomorrow. And then on Wednesday morning, we will continue 9 o'clock in this room with the new selection RST, and in room 4, the identification of timber and other wood products. So please consult the schedule, the notice boards outside. It has been posted. Thank you.
Merci à tous, merci aux interprètes.